I have nightmares where I'm trapped in the shower. A drain is plugged, and the water won't stop pouring down on me. Water rises to my ankles, to my waist, and then over my head. The shower curtains turn to glass, and my screams turn to gargles. A dark figure presses its face against the glass on the other side, and it watches me. I bleed, but it won't let me out. I swallow water and flail helplessly in my glass coffin. I wake up gagging. I know where the nightmare came from. I never have to dig deep. The incident is never far from my subconsciousness. Finding it is easy. Getting over it is not. It was the summer of my 12th birthday when the Hudsons moved in across the street. 3 people, one of them a really old woman. She was tiny, frail, skeletal almost. Thin white hair, faded blue, flowery dress. Her head hung from her neck and it wobbled as the man pushed her up a makeshift wheelchair ramp into the house. At the time, I couldn't figure out if she was alive or dead. A few minutes later, she appeared in an upstairs window, sitting in a wheelchair. She was directly facing my bedroom, and I cautiously peered out from behind my curtains. Her head was upright now, and she stared at me. Just stared, without moving her head an inch. I closed my drapes. For days, she sat at the window. She watched the cars putter down our suburban road and gazed at the neighborhood kids scurrying through their yards. I never saw anyone else in the room. Never saw her move from that wheelchair. At night, I'd nervously peek through the crack in my drapes. Her silhouette was still in that window, lights off, staring out into the darkness in my bedroom. I couldn't tell, but I knew she was watching me. The stories about her cropped up pretty quick amongst my friends in the neighborhood. That she was a witch, that she was just a doll, that she was actually dead. But I knew she wasn't dead. Sure, I never saw her move from that window, not once, and I never saw her head turn. But I felt her eyes move as they studied me. I could feel her watching me. All alone in my bedroom, in the middle of the night with my drapes firmly shut. I'd wake up and shudder. Her eyes were on me. I just knew it. I began sleeping on the floor. The lower I was, the better. Maybe she couldn't see me if I was on the floor. I told my parents that the old woman across the street was creeping me out. I pleaded with them to talk to the Hudsons and ask them to move her to a room without a window. They laughed and told me to let her live out her twilight years in peace. She was just watching the street, they said, and that probably made her feel happy and feel younger. Are you just going to stick me in a windowless room when I'm an old lady? My mum laughed. Remind me to move in with your sister when I'm in a wheelchair. A week later, there was some commotion at the Hudsons. I watched from my bedroom window as the man ran out from the house and opened up the double doors of his van. He jogged inside and reappeared minutes later, pushing the old woman in her wheelchair down the ramp. She looked frailer than before. She couldn't have weighed more than 70 pounds. Her head was flung to the side, resting on her right shoulder. Her body jostled in the wheelchair. But her eyes never left me, watched me the whole time. The man picked her up and placed her in the car. He folded the wheelchair and stuffed it in the trunk. He quickly hopped into the driver's seat. The younger woman pounced onto the passenger seat, and the man put his foot to the pedal. The old woman's limp head still faced me. It bobbed up and down as the van reversed down the driveway. I studied her face. It was expressionless, emotionless. Her tongue slightly hung from the right side of her mouth, but her eyes were on mine, and they stayed on me. The van accelerated down the street, and it was gone. My parents heard the news that afternoon from other neighbours. The old woman's condition was getting worse, and the Hudsons had taken her to some sort of home. She wouldn't be coming back. I went straight to my bedroom, and I looked across the street. I smiled. Her window was finally empty. The Hudsons didn't come back the next day. No van. That night, I looked out towards the old woman's window. There was no one there. No wheelchair. But the bedroom light was on. I remember telling my dad I thought it was strange, and he just shrugged and said, "Must be on some sort of timer or something." I woke up in the middle of the night and nervously peered out my bedroom window. That bedroom light was still on. It suddenly flicked off, and I ducked below my window frame. I slowly rose and looked out, expecting to see the silhouette of that tiny, skeletal being. I watched for 10 minutes, pinching and straining my eyes. The lights quickly flickered on, and then off again. I slipped on the floor again, clutching my pillow close. I had a late baseball practice the next evening. When I got home, my house was empty. My parents were at my little sister's softball game. I headed to the shower to rinse off. About 3 minutes into my shower, I felt cold. The hot stream was escaping the bathroom somehow, which didn't make sense because I had shut the door. I wiped the shampoo from my eyes, turned my head, and heard a strange noise that would haunt me in nightmares for years. The metal rings of the shower curtain being dragged across the shower rod. Someone was slowly opening the curtain. The shampoo stung my eyes, and through the stinging, I saw a dark figure behind the curtain. Long, pale, bony fingers gripped the curtain as it slowly opened. I instinctively backed up in the shower, and the curtain opened completely. There stood the old woman. I must have only looked at her for 1, maybe 2 seconds. But at that moment, time stood still. All these years, and I can still draw you a vivid picture of the horrifying image in front of me. Deceived white hair, crazy in her eyes, bones jutting out from under her stretched skin, stark naked. Blotchy skin, warts all over her body, skinny breasts hanging to her waist, hair where I didn't know people could grow hair. She smiled, grotesquely. I felt the shower tile against my back and the hot water pour on my face. In her other hand, the old woman held a letter opener. "August," she mumbled. "August, August, August." I leapt past her, knocking her tiny body to the floor. I ran downstairs, naked and sopping wet. In my panic, I somehow remembered I was nude, and I yanked a pair of shorts out of the hamper in the laundry room, sending the hamper crashing to the floor. I hightailed it on foot down the street, eventually winding up at my friend's house. When the police arrived, they found the old woman, crumpled to a heap in the bathroom. The shower was still running. The policemen were all really nice to me, admiring me for my bravery. I told them what they said to me, August, and asked if they knew what that could have meant. "It will be August in a few days," one of them shrugged, "and you can never fully understand old and crazy, son." The Hudsons only came to our street once more to retrieve their stuff. The "for sale" sign was up in days. My mum told me they couldn't face the neighbours for what happened. Apparently, they had taken the old woman, the man's mother, to a special home downstate. Somehow, some way, the woman managed to escape the home and caught a bus back to our town. It never quite made sense to me. She was so old, so frail, so helpless. She could barely move those weeks she lived in that house. How had she managed to travel hundreds of miles on her own? Anyway, as you can imagine what this did to me, I didn't shower for 21 years. I took baths, which I suppose aren't that different. It's still a tub and involves hot soapy water. But a shower, with its closed curtain, water peppering the tub floor and steam climbing the walls, you get lost in your own head in the shower. Thoughts consume you, and it feels so utterly safe. For a few minutes, you are alone from the world. It's your own private, misty kingdom. But that's what makes the shower dangerous. You're enclosed, vulnerable, naked. You're exposed. I talked to people about it, my parents, a shrink, but mainly I tried to push the incident deep down into places where I couldn't find it. I didn't talk about it with anyone since I was a kid. Life carried on. Besides the baths, I was pretty normal. A few months ago, something inside me clicked. I felt the urge to re-examine the incident. It was almost like a voice in my head was telling me to do it. My head wanted closure. I spent hours online, trying to track down any information on the Hudsons and the old woman. I finally found what I was looking for. An obituary for the old woman. She had died 4 years ago. Somehow, that walking skeleton hadn't checked out for another 15 years. The obituary was a black and white picture from when she was a young woman. It was a photo of her and her deceased husband on their wedding day. His name was August, and he looked exactly like me. I closed the browser and stared at my computer desktop for 10 minutes. It finally made more sense. Why she called me August. Why she was obsessed with watching me. Maybe she used to write letters to her husband, and that's why she was clutching the letter opener that night. For a small moment, I felt a little better. Things always seem better when they make more sense. "Honey, is everything okay?" It was my wife. "I think so," I said. I took the first shower I had taken in years that night. I didn't even jump when the curtain rungs dragged across the shower rod and my wife entered. But as she embraced me under the hot water, one question wouldn't leave my head. How come the young woman in that wedding photo looks exactly like my wife. People look at me strange when I tell them I have an 18-year-old son. I'm 33. When James and I go out, it isn't uncommon for people to ask if he's my little brother. He could easily pass for being in his 20s, and so could I. The past 18 years haven't been without their trials, but I like to think I did the best I could given the situation. During my freshman year of high school, I knocked up my girlfriend. Her parents were going to put the baby up for adoption, but my mom stepped in and helped me get custody. My son is a straight A student. He's a point guard for the school basketball team. I scrounged enough money to get him a halfway decent car. He's popular in all the ways I wasn't. By the time I was his age, I had a 2-year-old son, a GED, and a job at the local Pella factory. We live in a 2-bedroom apartment duplex, a few blocks down from his high school. He does his homework without much prompting, and spends his downtime with friends or in the living room, kicking my ass at Call of Duty. At one point, I thought he might be gay. I wouldn't have cared, but I thought it was weird that a boy of his age had never had a girlfriend. I asked him about it and he smiled, saying, "No, Dad, I'm not gay. I just want to wait until I'm a little older to get out there. Wouldn't want you to be a grandfather in your 30s. That was our sex talk. Between the internet and the sex ed classes I had to sign a permission slip for, I figured he knew the basics. A few months ago, he told me he was going out late. When I asked why, he told me he had a date. I didn't have any questions. I slipped him a $100 bill and told him to be home in time for breakfast. He was a good kid. I trusted him. After that, it became a semi-regular thing. He let me know on Friday afternoon that he was going to be out late that night. Each Saturday morning, he'd be home and sitting on the couch playing the Xbox before I climbed out of bed. I never met any of his dates, but I figured he was keeping it to himself. Like I said, I trusted my son. He had a good head on his shoulders and I had no reason to suspect that anything was amiss. I don't normally watch the news. Between my Facebook feed and Twitter, I usually knew enough about current events not to care. For whatever reason, I found myself sitting in front of the television at 5 in the afternoon and decided to watch the news. I kinda wish I hadn't. The television switched from a commercial to showing the anchor sitting there with a somber face. She looked at the camera and said, "Later tonight, we'll cover a developing story. Several area women are still missing as police look for clues as to whether or not the disappearances might be related." We live in a sleepy little town. The idea that something like that could be happening so close to home shook me a little. The idea that my son could be out and about with something like that happening in town scared me a little too much. I talked to him about it. He told me not to worry. James was a big kid. He stood just under 7 feet tall and had a wide frame. I wasn't worried about someone getting the jump on him, but as a big guy myself, I knew that having a large frame meant very little if someone else had a gun. James assured me that I had nothing to worry about. Just to be safe, I swiped his cell phone while he was asleep. I installed an app that allowed me to see his location at all times. Maybe I was just being paranoid, but I remembered being 17 and thinking that I was invincible. I didn't give it much thought. After setting the app to hidden mode, I put it back on the charger in the kitchen and didn't pay it much mind after that. I figured if I ever got worried while he was out, I could pull up the app on my phone and see his location. As long as it wasn't too out of sorts, I'd relax and get back to watching Netflix. I started following the case of the missing women online. It was developing into a bit of a media sensation in our area. 6 women had gone missing over the course of 10 weeks. They varied in age and appearance. No bodies had been recovered, but the police were operating under the assumption that foul play might be involved. When the 7th woman went missing, my heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen Rochelle in 10 years. She came back around when James was about 7. She tried to do the mother thing but didn't have the chops for it. After a few months of broken promises and missed appointments, I got filed a motion for the court to do a drug test. After she failed the test, I had my lawyer file another motion stripping her of any visitation with my son. I didn't want my son to have to deal with that. It was Saturday morning, and I was very apprehensive about going downstairs. James and I didn't talk about his mother very much. She had spiraled out of control after giving birth to him, and used just about any drug she could trade a body for. By the time she had come around to visit him, she had aged 20 years in only 7. Her arms were covered in track marks, and her teeth were yellow to the point of decay. To be honest, I was surprised she stayed alive long enough to be abducted. With a heavy heart, I approached my son in the living room and said, "Son, we need to talk about your mother." James sighed and paused his game. He looked up at me and said, "What'd she do this time?" I sighed and said, "She went missing last night. Police say there were signs of a struggle at her trailer." James stared at the television like he was looking through it, and unpaused his game. He continued looking forward as he said, "Yeah, well, that really isn't news, is it?" James and I didn't talk about his mother because he didn't like talking about her. One of the main reasons I involved a lawyer was because, during one of her visits, she picked him up and took him over to her apartment. Apparently, she had a few customers come by while my son was sat on the couch. His first real visit with his mother turned into junkies sitting next to him on the couch as they plowed $20 a pop to nail his mother. 3 hours later, a guy James called Stephen dropped him off at the house. He was there when I got off work. I asked him what happened, and all he would say is that his mother didn't want him there anymore. He had sat outside without a jacket for 4 hours. Of all the things that could have happened to him, I was relieved more than anything that it had been so minor. I had heard horror stories about situations like that which ended in much more gruesome outcomes. I immediately put James into therapy after that. Within a few years, his effect returned to normal and his visits to the therapist became less frequent. Up until that night, he had asked me about his mother about once every couple of months. In the time since, I think he may have brought her up once. The following week, he let me know he was going out on another date. My pendant worry manifested that night in pulling up an app on my phone. He drove to a random address on the other side of town and then out to a spot in the middle of nowhere. I installed the app several weeks prior and didn't give it much thought. However, I hadn't been aware that it had been tracking his movements. According to the logs, he had been to the location in the middle of nowhere at least 4 times in the previous 6 weeks. I looked over his stops and his routes, and noticed that one of the places he had been was Rochelle's trailer, the night she went missing. I was suspicious but unwilling to grasp what every cell in my brain would have been shouting at me if it was any other kid. I threw my phone onto the bed and pulled a bottle of whiskey from my nightstand. I drank myself to a sleep and woke groggy the next morning. James was downstairs playing Dark Souls and eating a Pop-Tart. I knocked back a Red Bull and stumbled out to my car. I had decided to go out to that spot in the middle of nowhere and check out where my son had been taking his dates. I really wish I hadn't. I really wish I hadn't. My GPS led me to a gravel road that had fallen into disrepair. After driving down it for about a quarter of a mile with dense forest on either side, it opened up to a clearing with a small pond. I pulled up at the edge of the gravel and got out of my car. I could see remnants of a campfire near the pond. I walked over to it. The ashes were still warm. I sighed with relief. My son had found a quiet field with a pond in the middle of nowhere and was swooning his dates under the stars. I was almost proud of him. And then I noticed the footprints leading towards the pond. It looked like someone had dragged something heavy to the edge of the water. I walked closer to the edge of the water and stared into the murky water. I turned back towards the fire pit and noticed bloodstains on the grass behind me. With some trepidation, I waded into the water, and about 10 feet out, my worst fears were confirmed. I stepped on something hard. I reached down to feel what it was, and it was a thick logged chain. I pulled on it to reveal a waterlogged body wrapped in a blanket. I pulled away the cloth to reveal a bloated face. It was Rochelle. I quickly wrapped her body back up and pushed it under the water. I ran back to my car and sped home. I sat in the driveway for 15 minutes, trying to figure out if I was having a panic attack or a heart attack. My heart pounded in my chest so hard that it hurt. Tears streamed down my face as I tried to rationalize what I had found. I tried to convince myself of 50 different conspiracy theories that explained why my son was innocent. Someone knocked on the driver's side window of my car and I about jumped out of my skin. It was James. I climbed out of the car hesitantly, and he immediately wrapped his arms around me saying, "Whatever it is, it's okay, Dad. Just tell me what happened." He was such a good son. For a brief moment, I forgot about the pond and his mother's body. I followed him inside, and after changing into some dry clothes, I joined him in the living room. I sat in my easy chair as he sat across from me on the couch. After a few minutes of silence, I stared at the floor and said, "I found your mother." He responded, "Oh?" I don't know what I expected him to say, but his response hit me hard. It wasn't surprise or even anger. It was that same flat effect he showed me on the rare occasions I had caught him doing something he wasn't supposed to do. I looked right at him and said, "Please tell me you didn't do anything stupid, son." He looked off to the side and said, "Define stupid." I raised my voice a little. "God damn it, James! Did you kill your mother?" He laughed and said, "That whore was dead a long time before I clocked her over the head and dragged her to my car. Any whore that would try to sell her son for dope has been dead for a long time." I couldn't speak. I had always wondered about that night, but James never talked about it. James continued, "You know, really, I lucked out. The asshole that paid for me gave me a ride home and told me never to go back to my mother. I guess it could have been a lot worse, but really, that was the day I snapped. I understood how meaningless life really was. Of course I killed her. That whore deserves to die 6 times over." Tears filled my eyes as my son confessed to more than 15 murders. I sat there, dumbfounded as he gave the details and descriptions that no child his age should have been able to produce. When he finished telling me everything, I just sat there. What could I say? What should I have said? My son confessed to being a serial killer, and the only thought going through my head was trying to figure out how to make sure it didn't ruin his life. I finally worked up the nerve to say, "We need to get you help, son. This isn't healthy." James cut me off. "No therapists are going to help me, Dad. You've been good to me, so I'll spare you the bullcrap. We both know that I turn 18 in about a month. I'll be out your hair. Besides, I have bigger plans." I stared at my son and tried to wrap my mind around the beautiful monster he had become. 17 years of being his parent. 17 years of being his parent, and I'd never, in a million years, imagined that he would turn out so broken. I quit my job about a week later. By his 18th birthday, I'd burned through most of my savings drinking and trying to forget what I had learned. Sure enough, the day after his 18th birthday, he was gone. Any part of me that held hope for him was lost a few weeks later when police discovered the bodies in the pond. By that point, he was long gone. I received a postcard a few weeks ago. It was a picture of a sandy beach. On the back were the words, "Hey Dad, just letting you know I'm fine." I tossed it on the table next to the door and went back to drinking. Part of me wants to go to the police and tell them everything. It probably wouldn't be that hard to track him down. Still, he's my son. I'm willing to do plenty of things, but serving my son up for the crimes that would land him on death row sits out of my level of civic duty. The guilt gets a little worse each day. For now, all I can do is hope that he really is fine. I have no idea where he is. I don't want to know. All I can do is hope that he stopped killing. He really was a good boy. He's tall and charismatic. I'm sure he'd make it big if he just tried. It was a Tuesday night, and I had just returned home from my work shift. I was without a home at the time, so I lived at my mother's house. When I opened the front door, the lights were off throughout the house, and my mother was absent. So I decided to call her cell phone just to find out where she was and if she was okay. I laid on the bed in my room, pulled out my cell phone and dialed her number. No one answered. I decided to dial again, in case she was busy or I accidentally called the wrong number. This time, there was an answer, but nothing was said on the other line. It was just there. I kept repeating, "Hello?" But still there was no reply. I hung up and dialed once again. Someone picked it up. At first it was just there like the last call, but then there was breathing, followed by a grainy giggle, which was definitely of a man's voice. Then he hung up and the call ended. I felt a chill. I was dead certain I dialed the right number. I called my mother all the time, so it was practically instinctual, and the number I called read Mom whenever I dialed it. Soon, I went to the kitchen to microwave a bedtime snack. While I was walking toward the kitchen light, I noticed something. My mother's phone was on the counter. I used to live in New Jersey in an old Victorian, right in the smack dab middle of the boonies. Where I lived, cell phones rarely got reception. Back a few decades ago, when I was a kid, a housing development went up. Big places. They cleared a few miles of the barrens for it. It was a stone's throw away from my place. Once the places were finished, people moved in. City people, really. It was either old people or new families with real young kids. People that wanted to either wind their life down or start a new one up. Nothing special. I knew a handful of the kids through elementary school, but none of them were exactly my age. They were normal. When the people moved in, my mom made an effort to meet everyone, with us being so close and all. There was one guy that stuck out in my mind, mainly because he was bald, yet young. Probably 38 at the oldest, I want to say. My mom said not to say anything because he might have a disease or something like that. Years went by. I grew up and went to middle school. I came home one day. I had to walk because I missed all the buses. I went past the housing development. Glancing down the street, I didn't see anyone. Not a soul. It was around 5:20 according to my watch, if I remember right. Normally, all the fathers were getting home at 5-ish. Curiosity got me. I walked down the street to see what I could. Every house was dark, except for the Baldman's house. I glanced in his window and saw about the entire population of the small community sitting in his living room. Children, parents, the elderly, everyone. Standing in the middle of everything was the bald man. It seemed as though it was just a casual meeting. People were talking and laughing. Whatever. I didn't know why the hell I cared anyway. I walked home and got grounded for being late and not calling from the school. That night, my mum got a call from another local neighbour saying that she was hearing unsettling grinding noises coming from the small community. My mum said that someone was probably getting work done. When she asked me if I had seen anything on the way home, I didn't answer, as I was still bitter that she had grounded me in the first place. The next day, every kid from that small neighborhood was marked absent in school. And the day after that. The police went to investigate that night. The first thing they found was an ear on the front lawn of the bald man's house. A severed human ear. A child's arm was found in the trash can, dumped with a few empty pizza boxes, and a man's split open torso was located in the woods behind the property, with human bite marks penetrating the flesh. The rest of the community was inside the house. All the entrances, both doors and windows, were boarded shut. When they broke down the door, they found the corpses of everyone. The entire development's population. Children, parents, the elderly, everyone. Some were mutilated beyond initial recognition, and most missing organs like livers and kidneys. Forensics showed that the victims were alive when the organs were taken out. A child's body was also found in the oven of the house, burnt to the point where the skin melted. Forensics showed that the child was still alive when the skin started to melt. Children, parents, the elderly, everyone. Everyone except for the bald man. A background search on him proved that he was involved in a local sect of the occult, which are known to practice in the Pine Barrens. He fled. He hasn't been found. Needless to say, what happened literally tore our community apart in multiple ways. Instead of the boogeyman, my friends and I had nightmares about something real, about a bald man. Horror movies didn't scare me because I knew they were fake. What happened was real, and that terrifies me to this day. The massacre occurred in 1984, 31 years ago. I'm 44 now. I went back to the site last month. The houses are still standing. All of them are abandoned. The single road that once connected the community to the outside world is long overgrown. I can't find any police files, nor can I find any news broadcasts about the murders. The houses are still there, but everything that had to do with that place seems to be gone. I could spend hours telling all the urban legends I've heard about it. Weird NJ posted a story in their book, I think. Nothing's conclusive. No newspapers, no files. I searched the records of some of the children from my school. They were never legally documented. But I know, and every other person that witnessed it and lived in Milford County in 1984 knows. I cannot, in any way, express to you how much the events that I've described have literally ruined my life. If you doubt the reality, the only thing I can say is that you're wrong. This happened. This isn't meant to be a creepypasta, and this isn't an urban legend. The only reason I've posted it here is because I know that this is a community that will actually read what I'm writing. I'm not sure what I can say to make you believe, but a total of 37 people were murdered in the most brutal ways I can imagine. The place has a lot of names. It used to be called New City Village. Now it's called Demon's Alley. Look it up for yourself if you don't believe me. I'll add links in the description. People need to know about this. For all it's worth, please share this.